Hello, welcome back. I'm here with Lauren Wegman. Lauren, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Al. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. Hey, when you agreed to do this, I got really excited for a lot of reasons because we've been talking about doing something together for a while and finally things lined up and the fact that you are aligning the future of work with people analytics and workforce planning, obviously this is something that I'm passionate about, but I'm really excited to learn what you're up to. So if you would introduce yourself and what you're going to be talking about today.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lauren Wegman. I lead our people analytics team at Twitter. Our team mission is to conduct research studies and uncover data-driven insights to better attract, hire, engage, and retain the people that will carry Twitter forward. My background is industrial organizational psychology, where I focus on the changing nature of work. And we're going to talk a little bit about that within the future of work, I'm sure later here. But I am so excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation, Al.
Well, likewise, Lauren. And let's start right up front because, full disclosure, you and I went back on email a bit on what you'd be talking about and the key points. And I really loved how you structured your thinking. And I'll just call it out in my own perspective because I cite this Chinese proverb time and again: the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names.
I
And
love
one of the things
that.
that you called out is, what is the future of work? So, how about we start there? What is the future of work to you?
Yeah, I would love to start there. I think it's a question that doesn't get asked all that often. And I think it's so important for our understanding and grounding the discussion of what exactly this is. Before I get into what exactly it is, though, I do want to confront a couple misconceptions from my perspective. One is future of work as we talk about it today is not really focused on the future, it's focused on the present. And the second is that future of work is some hot new topic that's brand new in the field. And I don't think that's true either. The concept that work, the worker, the workplace is changing is really not new. And ever since that we could measure work, it's been changing, and people have been talking about it. And just go to a little preview here for you to kind of show some highlights over Time magazine, going back into the 90s here. You can see how relevant this topic is now, but also was then. And I think to begin to understand and define the future of work, I think it's really important to not focus on or start by describing the past, but in fact, I'm sorry, by describing the present, but actually do focus on the past and what we already know. So there's a lot that we know that can help us navigate this time period. And that, as I alluded to in my introduction, that was the focus of my academic life, my research career. Um, and long story short, the TLDR over dissertation, thesis, publications, articles, you name it. What we found, right, is that work is more complex, especially in terms of the number of skills needed to perform successfully, the amount of autonomy granted, and the interdependency of the work. And instead of those things leading to positive implications for our workforce, what we found actually is that they lead to some negative implications, many of which we are experiencing today, at least from popular press perspective. So things like too much autonomy turning into over responsibility, increased role conflict, blurring the boundaries between work and home life, decreased job satisfaction, increased emotional exhaustion or burnout. Um, and I think that this research provides some best practices in terms of virtual work and async. And there's a lot that has been done there, and I can kind of give you an example of some of the titles here, including that I co-edited, the changing nature of work from 2020. And I think all of this research and all this conversation is really a step in the right direction. But to me, there are really at least two differences that we're experiencing, and landing on in kind of understanding the changing nature of work and the future of work. And both of those, to me, are about they fall within kind of this idea of psychological adjustment, right? So the first one, Al, I think is obvious. You've talked a lot about this in some of your other presentations, but this idea of being forced to change, right? No one likes to do anything that they're forced to do. You take away options. You leave us in an uncomfortable place. And so I think that that's the first piece. And then the second one, in my opinion, this is one of the first times in our history that we've had to combat such deeply held norms about working, probably since women entered the workplace. I think could be a close likening there. But things like commuting in, things like 9 to 5, emailing a colleague who sits, down the hall from you, working at your desk, sitting at your cubicle, getting invited to the corner office. Whether you love these concepts, hate these concepts, or fall somewhere in between, you know them, right? You know what they mean. You know what goes on behind the scenes, and you can navigate this world. But given the complexities of today and the increased pace that we're experiencing changes to work, I really don't think the best practices of the past will always work for today's problems. And I know the best practices of today are going to work for tomorrow's. And I really believe that the key here from an employee perspective and from a policy perspective is around strategy. And how do we create those flexible processes and schemas which can change with the changes occurring? So I'll stop there. I know I said a lot. Al, what are your thoughts on
No,
that
I'm just
topic?
smiling because I love the way you think so much, because it has to be yelled from the mountaintops, because there's been so much what I'd call inertia from the past or legacy thinking that's carried the day. Hey, we did this here, we did this, it worked here, therefore there's this implication that it's going to work where
And it's
you are now.
comfortable. It's
Yeah,
comfortable to
it's
fall back
comfortable.
into that approach. Yeah.
100%. And to translate what I heard you say is that we have to learn at speed, at scale, and in a sustainable way. And that requires data. That requires, analyzing the right things. And where I want to ask a question, it also requires, correct me if I'm wrong, the right audience. So who's going to be consuming this insight to make the fundamental changes that are going to affect the worker experience? So there's my question for you. Who is the audience for the work that you are doing there at Twitter?
Well, I think the audience is everyone. I think you can look at this from multiple perspectives. I think you can look at it from a business standpoint. So let me take an example, specifically around predictive analytics, because obviously that's our topic here today. That's what we came to talk about. And I'm going to pick on a current topic like the Great Resignation, right? Very popular. A lot of talk about this, negative implications for organizations. And so I start with the question of, what if you, as an employee, as a manager, as a business leader, as an industry leader, what if you had a way with a certain degree of likelihood to predict how many employees overall, as well as in critical roles or hard to hire positions, leadership, any subset that you care about, leave, would attrit, would look for another job in 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months? And so, from a business standpoint, then you could be thinking about, how do we deploy targeted retention or recognition or development opportunities for this subset? How to build out our sourcing pipeline to be ready for attrition. The idea being decrease our time to fill, leading to quicker time to perform. Even looking internally at our internal pipelines and focusing on succession planning from kind of the team, the manager level. What about understanding the number of predicted attrits and how that can impact your budget and your headcount planning? From a recruiting perspective, so many implications for capacity planning within TA, and even the ability to gain insight on interview manager bandwidth and fatigue, especially as attrition increases. And then as an employee, I think one of the big things right now that I'm hearing a lot about in the press is of why folks are leaving and what can we do to keep them, what can we do to keep them here? And to me, we have to be able to successfully identify drivers of attrition, not just look at low engagement scores and not just look at high workload scores, but even look at what is driving it. Is workload driving attrition? And it's a little bit more than that too, because what does that even mean? How do you action that? How do you take that result of that model, actually do something with that information? And I think what you need to look for are the behavioral implications that this has. So are employees having meetings at unfriendly hours that are driving that increased workload? How many hours of screen time on average? How many hours of meeting? And, Al, I think that gets into some of the data parts of your question as well, kind of opening up new, interesting avenues of data to connect within the HR space. And just that was just a sampling of, I think, some of the strategic capabilities that people analytics can unlock for organizations using predictive modeling.
Yeah, I love that you are focusing because I'm very particular to language for reasons that I cited at the outset, like capacity I heard and workload. Workload is something that is often talked about in a kind of esoteric sense. It's like, okay, people have a certain amount of work. But it sounds like you're actually measuring it and looking at it as a driver of attrition, or potentially on the other side, driver of engagement and productivity. Can you speak to how you do that? And is that something that is a focus of leadership as well?
So I will clarify, we're not actively doing that today. What we are doing is we're taking more of a perception based approach to
Mhm.
workload. So trying to understand at what point is kind of too many meetings, not enough focus time, decreasing satisfaction with productivity. What I was alluding to though is that as more data collection becomes available and has become available, there are tools that collect Slack data, calendar data, email data, and have that ability to be able to really understand if you have a low manager satisfaction score, maybe it's due to the number of ones that you're not having with your manager. And so being able to set behavioral SLAs in kind of thinking about the future, that's, I think, we're going to be going is data, non-traditional HR data sources becoming more common for understanding HR programs and the employee experience.
Wow. Behavioral service level agreements. Am I understanding that right?
Yes,
I
yes.
love it. It's the case where we're people analytics can get very highfalutin, shall we say? It can get very into the math, into the tools, and all that. However, at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives, and there has to be a certain level of respect and appreciation for that. And so, what I want to ask is that you there in your role, obviously you've been there for a while. uh, you have leaders commissioning the work because they deem it important. And I imagine they deem it important for business purposes as well as humanistic purposes. So, can you speak to that potential, tension by doing right by the employee while also looking at, driving business value and productivity?
Yeah. This is one of the things I love about working at Twitter is that we really care about our people. We have a hashtag love where you work that is used all over Twitter and other sources. When we go into our brick and mortar offices, there's a bunch of those hashtags around. It really creates this culture of caring for the employee. From my perspective, what this looks like is within kind of within my remit. Surveys, so always focusing on or including things around wellness. Even before wellness was a topic to include, we were including things like that, on that satisfaction with productivity, on that satisfaction with workload, with focus time, like I said before. And I think that the piece is just as important as that behavioral piece. And I ultimately, I think both is really needed in order to unlock and understand what we can do to optimize, either from a employee, from a day-to-day perspective, from a manager and designing your team, from a leader and navigating your business, from a department, and meeting your business goals. And so I do have an example at Twitter, Al, if you're interested, that touches a bit around our diversification objective.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, for those of you who may not be familiar, Twitter, we have a diversification objective, which is around building playbooks for distributed work, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, the example that I want to share, it's within the diversity space, and specifically around representation that we set externally, to be 50% of our tweets, which are our employees, identifying as female, and 10 and 10, who identify as Black and Latinx within the US by the end of 2025. Um, and in order to set these and track progress, we use predictive modeling to determine KRs, and ultimately drive diversity representation growth, even during the pandemic. And so to start thinking about this, like many tech companies, when I was looking at this data to begin with, it looked like what you would expect, what you would assume, right? Less women, less RPs overall, especially in tech and leadership roles. Um, and then what actually started to happen is that we were a couple years in, and we were actually seeing a great impact, and that can be seen in some of our numbers here shared from our most recent IDEA IDEA 2021 annual report, which reports our diversity metrics on a quarterly basis. And so looking at this is great, good progress, but the question to me then becomes, how did this change occur? And there's not one answer. There's many factors. There's plans, there's initiatives, there's amazing colleagues across the people team, across the company, all worked together cohesively to really drive this change in representation. But since we're here today to talk about people analytics and workforce planning, I'll focus on my team's contributions here. So step one, we started with where we are today. I really like the saying, and I know it's used a lot by Peter Drucker, that you can't manage what you can't measure. I firmly believe that. And so our first step was really increasing awareness of where we are today and where we came from. In order for this work to be successful, we believe that every employee at Twitter needs to understand what we're trying to achieve together. And this is not just the executive team. So that's why we created an internal diversity dashboard so that any tweet can track change in real time. And that's a example there. That's also included in our blog, kind of showcasing what it looks like, as well as some of the functionality that's achievable. And I think that this helped increase visibility, and this enabled any employee at any level to go in and not just see company level representation, but to drill down into different teams, into their team, and start to really understand what are the challenges and what are the trends there. And so step two is the modeling piece. And so focusing on modeling the possible futures. Based on past hiring and attrition, it probably is no surprise that what we predicted to be in, or where we predicted to be in 1, 2, and 3 years, was not where we wanted to be. Our predicted future actually looked a lot like our recent past. And so we played with probabilities, we played with likelihoods, we focused on what if we could hire X% more, or what if we had the capacity from recruiting to hire a bit faster. And so we ended up projecting different futures and what they could look like in terms of representation milestones and what we would need in order to reach those milestones, and thus kind of rolled it up into company wide goals, which we call KRs. And then the final step, because modeling is great and good, access to data is very important, but none of this is effective without accountability. And so, we believe that accountability needs to start at the top for these types of initiatives. And so, in addition to those company-wide goals that I referenced, we actually set workforce representation targets for our different orgs or departments. And we worked with our executive team to clearly define their stake of responsibility for driving progress here. So we took into account things like the size of the team, the businesses they lead, their open headcount, their strategy, their projected pace of hiring and attrition. And that leads me to the outcome from the visual, in that over time we were able to change our projected trajectory. And now we're much closer to those 2025 KRs than where we projected 3 years ago. And the trend chart here, I think, is interesting in that you can see the change in slope from 2020 into 2021. And I hope that we can do that again from 2021 to 2022.
As you're sharing this, what is the receptivity of leadership, for your work? And I know this is like, oh, they love it, high five it. But when you talk about accountability, um, and some people might have some defensiveness if certain initiatives don't reap the desired returns. So it's my belief that leadership has to have, in one form, thick skin, in another form, just a growth mindset, this insatiable curiosity and willingness to learn, and let go of some of their mental models of the past that might not be applicable to what you asserted earlier, that might not be applicable to today. So is there that receptivity and that growth mindset, or is that something, frankly, that you had to coach them on, so they did not take this information, maybe kind of, it might have feared it beforehand? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I sure can. And I have to say I'm very lucky in that our leadership on the people team, as well as across the company, is very, very data driven. My boss, the wonderful Delana Brand, who is the CHRO of Twitter, came up through is also the head of diversity, and kind of came up through that space, and so very much believes in the power of this work. I think a good example of this is when I started at Twitter a little over 3 years ago. I had a team of 4, and now we're close to 20, and we've been growing at that rate right throughout the years of the pandemic. And I truly believe it's because of the insight and the recommendations. I think it's more than insight. I think it is the actionable recommendations that we're able to make to help better the employees, the managers, the HR team, and the business overall. And to your question, I liked this. To your question about what happens when you're presenting something that may not be expected, or may not be in the direction that the business wants to go, or that business leader thinks is where they need to go. And I think that's where the critical conversation comes in, and those are the important change moments. And so going into those conversations, with understanding why. Why did we not meet that target? What's going on behind the scenes? And a lot of times our survey data is a great source there. Our HRIS data is also, full of very useful information to be able to confirm or validate hypotheses. And so you do a little bit of hypothesis testing, and even if you don't have the one, causal reason, you can go in and you can explain, hey, here's some things that are going on, some factors at play that are likely impacting this situation, and why don't we work on focusing there and solving for those, and then we'll see that outcome shift. So it is about refocusing not on the outcome, but on those drivers of that outcome.
Mhm. Yeah, what I'm hearing is there's an openness to uncertainty and probabilistic decision making. The idea that, oh, here's this piece of insight and this is the answer, and therefore we're going to do that and everything's going to be okay. Obviously that's not realistic, let alone a healthy mindset. So glad you're in an environment where that is appreciated. I know we
Me
only have,
too.
yeah, yeah, I bet. And that's not always the case, unfortunately. So I have a couple more questions before we wrap here, and we're going to have you back on so we can discuss this even more.
Would
Because
love it. Yeah.
when you talk about bringing together the future of work with predictive analytics, and you also are working on workforce planning. And so, can you speak to that just a bit? And I want to wrap by talking about your team, because I know you mentioned your team a little bit, but you're hiring as well, so you're building your capability. But before that,
That is true.
workforce planning. What is it to you? Does it incorporate not only talent acquisition, but internal mobility and development as well, or is it focused primarily on talent acquisition?
So I mean, theoretically, it should be across everything, right? It should be like people analytics, which touches each point here. And I think that workforce planning is absolutely critical for success in companies navigating the workforce, and or the changes that we're experiencing today. And I think that people analytics plays a really invaluable role in bringing in, not just the workforce metrics and the trends and kind of the scenario planning that's more typical within the workforce planning space, but actually putting that strategic capability ahead of work that can only come in from bringing people analytics and workforce planning together to have that overview, right, of what is going on and bring in that prediction side too.
I'm smiling because I'm just happy somebody else is saying it. So it's absolutely true. When I hear people doing workforce planning, I'm asking, what data are they using? Is it just a theoretical process? Is it, or, to what extent, are they studying their workforce, not only the external environment? So it sounds like, you're doing both. And that work, as much as we like to wave a wand and it magically happen, actually takes people, it takes technologies, it takes standing up processes. So can you speak to the nature of your team and those roles you're looking to fill?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. So my team is organized into kind of three sub teams under people analytics. So we have a people data science team who is responsible for all of our data visualizations and reporting on candidate and employee data. They are also the ones that have a relationship with our IT team, with our systems team, and own the HR side of our data warehouse data management systems. So the skill sets on that team are really focused around data management, data engineering, as well as data visualization and, of course, analysis. And I'm hiring for two roles on that team right now. One is a manager position who is focusing on reporting and so dashboard building, and then a workforce analyst as well. And my second sub team is surveys and research, and that's kind of half and half. So as you've probably told from my answers earlier, surveys I think is so important to predictive work, and so we have kind of a full suite of life cycle surveys and a team that manages that, and an open role on that team for a tool specialist. On the research side, really focus on the predictive modeling, the external understanding of the labor market. We have a good understanding of our internal data, so bringing in that external labor market, marrying those together, and understanding what predictions we can make and how we're doing is just absolutely critical. And then the last team is applied science. And that team is kind of your more traditional IO psychology background, and they are our consultative arm. Their charter is to build measurement and validation into everything that we do as a people team. Yeah, so that's the lay of the land, Al.
That is some landscape now. I mean, from 4 people to that, that
We've been
warrants
busy.
yeah, that's a well, congratulations, because that doesn't happen on accident. It happens because a lot of good work was delivered, and there's a belief that you're delivering critical value. So kudos to you and your team, and keep up the great work. And again, we're going to have you back on because there's more to investigate and share. But I want to call it out. You're one of the few who has, in my view anyway, brought together this potentially esoteric notion of future of work and brought it into the here and now and how it affects decisions around measurement strategy, around diversity, equity, inclusion, employee experience strategy, and of course, as you mentioned there at the end, workforce planning. So it does take a concerted, thoughtful approach, and it sounds like that you are doing that there at
Well,
Twitter.
thank
So
you, Al. It's definitely my passion for sure.
yeah, we get to see that it comes through. It comes through. Well, again, thank you for sharing. How can people learn more about you and what you're doing? We'll put up you're on Twitter, I imagine.
Yes, yes. Please reach out to me on Twitter at PeoplePhD.
All right. And again, thank you. You be well, and we'll see you soon. Yeah. All right.
Sounds good.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.